You've rewritten that message at least 3 times. Not because the first version was unclear, because something in you needed it to land a certain way. Needed the other person to understand not just what you were saying, but why you were saying it, and that you meant well, and that you weren't trying to be difficult. That's not communication. That's preemptive defense. And it's worth asking why you keep doing it. Over-explaining is not a communication style. It's a defense mechanism. When you spend 5 minutes justifying a simple no, or provide 3 paragraphs of context for a decision that only needed 1 sentence, you aren't trying to be clear. You're trying to manage how the other person feels about you. We tell ourselves that more information leads to more understanding, but in reality, that over-explaining is where your authority goes to die. It's the sound of self-doubt leaking into the room. Think about the last time you had to decline an invitation or set a boundary, professional or personal. Did you send a short, direct message? Or did you rewrite it 4 times, adding because after because, hoping to find the exact combination of words that would prevent the other person from being disappointed? Maybe you've noticed these patterns. You add extra justification even after someone has already agreed with you. You explain personal choices to people who didn't ask for an explanation. You feel a spike of something close to panic the moment there's a 3-second silence after you speak. On the surface, this looks like being thorough. You tell yourself you're being transparent or considerate. But if this were actually about communication, you would stop once the point was made. The fact that you keep going, even when it feels draining, suggests there's a deeper friction at play. If this isn't about being understood, what is it really about? Most productivity advice tells you to just be more confident. This is unhelpful because it ignores the mechanics of why the over-explaining happens in the first place. The pattern is driven by 2 specific types of friction running simultaneously. The first is emotional friction. This is the immediate, visceral anxiety of imagined judgment. You feel internal pressure to neutralize the other person's potential negative reaction before they've even had it. Your brain is running a simulation, and in that simulation, their disappointment is already happening, and you're already managing it. The second is identity friction. Underneath the behavior is a belief, usually unexamined, that says, I am only valid if others agree with my reasons. If you believe your no isn't allowed to stand on its own, you will naturally try to prop it up. You build a scaffold of justifications around the statement, because without it, the statement feels illegitimate. Here's the disruption. Clarity is not about quantity, it's about certainty. When you provide 10 reasons for a choice, you aren't making your position stronger. You're providing 10 different targets for someone to argue with. You're inviting a debate where there should have been a statement. The moment one reason gets challenged, the whole structure shakes. And you add more sentences to stabilize it. That's not communication. That's negotiation for the right to have a boundary. To understand why this pattern is so persistent, you have to look at the loop that sustains it. It runs in 4 stages, and it's almost automatic. First, the trigger. You set a boundary, make a decision, or say something that might inconvenience someone. The outcome is temporarily uncertain. Second, anticipated judgment. Your brain simulates the other person thinking you're being difficult, lazy, or unkind. The simulation doesn't need to be accurate, it just needs to feel plausible. Third, the expansion. You launch into explanation to neutralize the imagined judgment. You cover every angle. You soften, qualify, justify. Fourth, the erosion. You feel a brief hit of relief. The pressure drops. but your overall sense of authority has quietly decreased, because you've signaled to them and to yourself that your decision is open for review. And this is where most people unknowingly weaken their position. Every extra word you add is a signal that you don't fully trust your own right to make the call. Your brain avoids rejection by increasing explanation, not clarity. And the loop continues because the relief was never real. It was just uncertainty temporarily reduced. The next conversation, the next silence, the next pause before someone responds. The loop fires again. There's a mechanical way to interrupt it. It doesn't require feeling confident first. It requires a constraint, the one-sentence boundary. The principle is straightforward and socially uncomfortable. State your decision in one sentence, then stop talking. The explanation loop sounds like this. I'd love to help, but I'm completely buried with the current project, and I've got a few other things stacking up. And I really want to give it the attention it deserves, so I'm not sure I can right now. Maybe check back with me next week. The one-sentence boundary sounds like this. I don't have the capacity to take that on right now. Then silence. The silence is not a problem to solve. It's the mechanism. When you stop talking, you allow the other person to process what you actually said, rather than the scaffolding you built around it. You move from a negotiation posture to a statement posture. You might worry that this reads as cold. In practice, concision tends to register as certainty. It signals that your decisions are considered enough that they don't require a 500-word defense. Respect tends to follow restraint, not because people consciously reward brevity, but because genuine certainty is uncommon. And when someone demonstrates it without performance, it lands differently. I don't explain to be accepted. I state to be understood. There's a layer underneath this that takes longer to surface, and it's the part most advice skips entirely. The over-explanation isn't actually for the other person. Think about what's happening in the moment. You're talking, adding sentences, qualifying your earlier sentence. And if you're honest, the other person has already understood the point. They nodded. They said, "Okay," and you kept going. Who were you talking to? Yourself. Over-explaining is internal self-negotiation. You're not trying to convince them. You're trying to convince yourself that the statement was okay to make, that you're allowed to have that preference, that the decision holds, that you're not a bad person for saying no. This is why confidence advice fails at the loop level. You can't wait to feel confident before you set a boundary. You build the constraint first, and the internal recalibration follows. Not the other way around. Even people who appear highly confident will relapse into over-explaining under the right social pressure, in conflict, in evaluation, in situations where approval feels conditional. The difference isn't that the loop doesn't fire for them. It's that they recognize the explanation itch and choose not to scratch it. Silence often communicates more authority than words, not because silence is inherently powerful, but because choosing it when every instinct says to fill the space is a demonstration of something most people don't see often enough. Applying this requires noticing the beat between your statement and the urge to keep talking. There's a moment, half a second, maybe less, where the explanation hasn't started yet and the discomfort is fully present. That beat is where the loop either fires or doesn't. The discomfort won't disappear with practice. The anticipation of judgment is a conditioned response. It doesn't get quieter just because you understand it. What changes is whether you treat it as a command. The discomfort says, "Explain more." The recalibration says, "That's the loop." You state, you stop. Not because you don't care about being understood, because you've recognized that compulsive explanation doesn't produce understanding. It produces noise, and it costs you something you weren't aware you were spending. The identity shift this produces is quiet. Not a new personality, not a performance of confidence, a small, durable change in what you hold yourself responsible for. You are not responsible for managing how others interpret your boundaries. You can be clear. You can be respectful. But what they do with what you've said, whether they agree, whether they're disappointed, whether they push back, that lives outside your boundary, not inside it. When you over-explain, you're attempting to control interpretation. When you apply the one-sentence boundary, you're releasing that control, not carelessly, but deliberately. You're accepting that some discomfort is the price of a statement that actually stands. And here's what that relinquishment builds over time. It recalibrates the internal model that required the explanation in the first place. The loop doesn't disappear. It reappears in new contexts, under new pressures, wherever approval still feels conditional. But its power over your behavior changes when you stop treating it as a directive and start treating it as information. It tells you that social risk feels present. That's useful. It doesn't tell you that explanation is the correct response. The goal isn't to become someone who communicates less. It's to move from high explanation, low certainty, to low explanation, high certainty. To recognize that your yes has no real weight, if your no always requires a footnote. This same friction, the overcompensation, the approval-seeking loop, the inability to let a statement stand without support, shows up in other patterns, in how you might find yourself agreeing to things you have no intention of doing, not in how you soften requests until they become suggestions, in how you say yes to avoid 5 seconds of awkward silence. That thread runs further than this video reaches. For now, the loop is not a personality trait. It's a miscalibrated friction response, and miscalibrated responses can be recalibrated, not through motivation, not through willpower, but through one precise behavior, repeated at the right moment. State it. Stop. Let the silence do what words were never going to do anyway. You already knew your decision was valid. The work is in acting like you did.